One, two, three. Welcome to Scéalta. If you've just joined us, my name is Joe Austin. And for those who have seen Scéalta before, you will know that the object of the programme, which is a joint production between Swansea University here and unthinkable, is to inform and, of course, amuse. And the idea is that we bring people on every week who perhaps you wouldn't have access to. For any of us who are involved in lockdown, for those who are forced to watch television, read papers and listen to the news, we have wall-to-wall experts in every subject, invading our living rooms or our kitchens or whatever. And one of the things I suppose we'll have all noticed is that no two of these experts say the same thing. Today, our guest is the real thing. He is an expert in his field. He has led the transformation of an industry that had to be nearly dragged from the dark ages to where we are now. His name is Terry Stevens. He is a professor. He has driven the tourist industry to where it is today, and he has much more to say. So, Terry, welcome to Scéalta.
Thank you very much, Joe. Delighted to be with you on what is here in Wales anyhow, a lovely summer, spring day. Birds are singing, flowers are growing. The surrealism of it all is really, really marked, but delighted to be with you in Belfast.
You're the only person, and I'm sure there are many more, who talks about Wales in that passionate way. And you're clearly in love with Wales. And I know you're originally from Somerset, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I'm originally from what I regard anyhow as the prettiest village in the whole of Europe, a place called East Coker, which is just a few miles south of Yeovil. Now, East Coker, you, I'm sure, and many of your listeners may have heard of it. It's one of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartet poems. It's the second after Burnt Norton. And East Coker is where his predecessors came from, and they emigrated to the States. And Eliot returned to East Coker in the 40s and fell in love with the place from whence his ancestors came, and wrote about the village in a very passionate way as a sort of metaphor for what Britain ought to be like post-war. And the personal connection with Eliot goes more than the fact that I was born in East Coker. It's the fact that my dad, who was the village carpenter, was, as many of your listeners would know, that the village carpenter was also the undertaker. And my dad was charged with creating a box for the ashes of Eliot and for the interment of T.S. Eliot in the parish church. And the delight of all of this is that, of course, he didn't have a clue who Eliot was. You know, he'd never heard of him. Why would he have done? But the tradition in the village was that on every burial, the undertaker would hold a new spade over the grave, and that the mourners would put a silver token on the spade when they took a piece of earth. And of course, Eliot's poem is about ashes to ashes, in my beginning is my end. And I remember Dad coming back from the service saying, bloody hell, he said, that was the best day's work I ever did, because there were all these Americans who thought this quaint tradition of putting silver on a spade was magnificent. So he had more silver dollars in his pocket than he'd ever had silver coins from the sterling mint in his entire life.
It's no exaggeration, and just taking the passion from that story, but it's no exaggeration that you're deeply in love with Wales.
Well, I came to Wales first in 1970. So I came to university in Swansea in 1970. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at Swansea University studying geography. And interestingly, I'd never been to Wales. I never knew there was a Welsh language. You know, and that says an awful lot about the education system in England. So I arrived in Wales on a Sunday in September 1970. And the first two people I met were Welsh speakers. And we became great friends. They're still my best friends. And it was from then I took on the fact that this was a different country than the one I'd grown up in and been born in. And maybe I should think about learning Welsh. So that's when I sort of began to learn Welsh, began to have my respect for this country that has been my home now since 1975. So after Swansea University, I did a master's degree in land management in Reading, returned to work at the National Museum of Wales. There I met my wife, she's a Welsh speaker, and we've lived in Wales ever since.
And you went on, of course, to produce a beautiful pictorial, Landscape Wales, which is just beautiful. I don't know whether it ever became a bestseller. If it didn't, it should have. But it's such a lovely people book, such a beautiful kind of introduction to any country.
That's very kind of you to say so. It was a real surprise. A publishing house in Wales called Graphic approached me and said, look, you know, we want to do a coffee table book that's essentially photographic, but we'd like you to choose your 12 favorite places in Wales and write about them from your perspective, which as a geographer was delightful. But I felt a real imposter, you know, I mean, I'd only lived here part of my life, but it was a lovely challenge. And it's a book full of wonderful photographs by wonderful Welsh photographers. And there's a smattering of essays that reflect my interest in landscape, and particularly the way in which landscape inspires artists and poets and inspires a people. So if anybody cares to get hold of it. Interesting, you talk about bestseller. The original book was a coffee table book retailing at £35. And for those types of books, they reckon about 1,200 copies sells is a good sell. And we sold about 1,000. The publishers then decided to produce a small book about 6 inches by 8 inches for the tourist market. And they sold rather a lot. But I was on a one-off payment, not a royalty basis. So I really didn't, you know, take full economic advantage of the sales.
Well, we're going to come on to talk about the new book, which of course is going to be a bestseller and is probably going to make you a very rich man.
Well, if not, I'll be the first to take you for a meal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my introduction to you, first of all, I should say you're no stranger to Belfast, and you've spoken at a number of events during the Scéalta. You've spoken in New Connolly Centre, RSG Connolly, and I have had the pleasure of being in Ljubljana with you, where you've introduced us who are involved in the tourist trade into a whole new dimension to tourism. But when I spoke, I talked about the innovative nature of your drive within tourism. That's not an exaggeration.
Well, again, that's very kind of you to say so. Let me perhaps just take a little time to explain my relationship with Belfast. In 1970, when I'd finished my A-levels, you have to choose where you want to go to university. And my choice at the time was Swansea first, Belfast second, as where I wanted to go to study geography. And there were three of us, three amigos from Yeovil. We played rugby together, football together, and we chose our universities together. We all chose Swansea and Queen's as our first two choices. I was lucky. At the time, I thought it was lucky that I managed to get the grades to go to Swansea. My two amigos ended up in Queen's, living in, is it Elms? Halls of residence?
Yeah.
And so as a result, throughout the period, 1970, 1973, they were coming over to Swansea for weekends. I was going over to Belfast for what I must say was a far better party scene in the University in Queen's than it was in Swansea. And then so I had nice connections with Belfast then, loved the place then. And then in 1982, I was appointed the Allied Irish Bank's visiting professor of town planning at Queen's with a lovely, lovely man called John Greer, who's no longer with us. But that gave me a connection with Queen's. I stayed connected with Queen's, with the Gibson Institute for Sustainability over the years, working with Dr. Jude Stevens. They had an outstation down in Macherveld, dealing with rural sustainability. I spent a lot of time there through the 80s and 90s. And then had the pleasure of being asked to do the tourism strategy for Belfast with dear Brian Johnson, and working with John McGrillen and Jerry Lennon and Harry Connolly and you. And that's where a real love and desire for Belfast grew. I did the original business planning for Titanic, and then the work I've done with you in West Belfast, which has been a delight. And I must say, you in West Belfast, Harry, yourself, and the good people in Belfast, including the City Council, have probably been one of the best client groups I've ever had. You listen, you react, you understand, and I think we have a relationship that transcends being client and consultant into being deep friends, I would hope, Joe, anyhow.
Yes. I mean, I have listened to you on a number of occasions in your professional capacity, as well as talking to you off work, if you like. And you bring to tourism, I think, a sense that it's very much people-driven. And it also talks about, destination accountability, that there are more than city centre tourism. There are more than the big iconic sites. There is a tourism out there that people want to be adventurous. They want to suss out things in their own time and their own way. And that hasn't always been the approach of some of those who have been charged with promoting tourism. But before you answer that, I want to ask you a question, which I probably should have asked you earlier on. You talked about your father and those endearing ways, which is pleasant to hear. Was your father alive when you became a professor?
No, he died very young. He had cancer. He was 56, so he saw me go to university. He knew our first granddaughter for about 6 months. But there is a sweet irony here, is that he would never take a job that meant he couldn't walk home to lunch. So he inhabited his square mile. And this is this incredible generational link to tourism. So he never had a holiday. I'll come back to that in a minute. He never left his square mile, really. And here's his son, who's worked in 55 countries. In a generation, how things have changed. But I'll return to his story because it's lovely, and I guess it resonates across rural Ireland in many, many ways. He got terribly homesick if he ever had to go away from home. And while he was ill, before he died, I said to him, look, Dad, you've never wanted a holiday, but now more than ever, Mum deserves a break. I said, what about a short weekend to London? It's 3 hours away. If you want to come home after an hour, you can, but let's give Mum the treat of a short break in London. Anyway, he managed 2 nights. And on the Monday, they came back. I said, did you enjoy it? He said, well, the hotel was nice. He said, the meals were nice. We saw some sights in London. They were good. He said, it's a shame it's so bloody far from anywhere.
I wanted just to I'm a great believer that for better or for worse, sons inherit some of the values of their fathers. And if you're lucky like me and you inherit values from a good father and from someone who has good values. If I could jump you forward, you're stuck in the middle of an industry that you're busting to change. How big of a challenge initially was that?
Well, it is a challenge. And go back to this point about, you know, the relationship, the characteristics of your father. My father always believed that friendship had to pervade and transcend everything. And despite the small geography of his world, he was very loyal and he was very kind. So friendship, loyalty, kindness. I would love to think if I've inherited small bits of each of those characteristics, that's been important. And I would certainly say that that's how I've always tried to develop my relationship in a business sense. So it's in a way how I would hope I regard the relationship with you and West Belfast is that first and foremost, we're friends.
Yes.
Secondly, we're kind to each other. And thirdly, we're loyal to each other.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think if those would be the traits I would love to see somebody describe as the way I went about my business. And if you get those right, you stand a better chance of persuading people that what you're saying is going to be good for them. So in the world of tourism, if I can create a friendship, demonstrate loyalty and give kindness, then I hope people will listen to what I'm saying a bit more conscientiously and will start doing the sort of innovative things that I'm suggesting for them. And all of those things you described about what we ought to be doing in tourism what we ought to have been doing in tourism over the last 10 years, we now must do. It's essential that we do going forward over the next 10 years.
I mean, I can remember a time when tourism was about stuffed donkeys and hats, you know, Mexican style hats, and it was about people getting 10 days, 2 weeks in Spain, and anywhere else was beyond even their imagination. It was about hotels, drink, food, home. And was that the industry that you, as a younger man, walked into, or was it already beginning to become more diverse and to change? I mean, for instance, I can just imagine the conversation when you're telling people that you intend to go and work in Belfast at a time when Belfast wouldn't have been that safe. I mean, I can just imagine them pulling their hair out and then pulling your hair out. Was it like that? Was it as difficult as that?
Well, I mean, when I first entered tourism, I would say we're very much at the point that is where we're at now, coming out of coronavirus and the lockdown. So in that, you know, late 60s, early 70s, we were open to new suggestions of exploring new places. 1970, I went to the old Yugoslavia and discovered the delights of the olive oil and the truffles and the great food and the culture of what became Croatia or Slovenia. In 1970, I had no hesitation visiting Belfast to explore a different culture. It was then in the late 70s that greed kicked in, that the tourism models started to go to a volume-based model, you know, and that was of its time. I'm not critical of it. That is what happened. You know, the annual holidays, the disposable income, the desire for sun, sand, sea as the escape. You know, we were on a trajectory that was of its time. And of course, that then developed a momentum of its own. But what we've seen in the period really 2012 through to 2020 is the economy and the environment beginning to say, whoa, hang on a minute. You know, over-tourism became a word from 2018 onwards. Bill Gates, 2015, was talking about pandemics. We saw the growth of low-cost airlines driving what was happening in destinations, and destinations then saying, oh, hang on, is this right for us? So the warnings of what we now know as COVID-19 were probably there for the last 5 or 6 years, but the model we built tourism on didn't want to hear it. And of course, we're now in a situation where we have to listen to it, and we have to reset all the buttons. We have to reset all the buttons.
In July of last year, you spoke at a conference in RSD Connolly, in the Connolly Centre that I was involved in helping to organise. And the theme of the conference was political tourism, not a hot potato. It's not the controversial. It's not the black dark tourism that's promoted. That view of tourism and everything can be shaped around, in a good way, shaped around new adventures and sites. I seen you at your best in Ljubljana, where you were describing the purity of the water as a tourist attraction. You were talking about, a loaf of bread and something that someone would travel about. Do you look for those things? Do they come naturally to you? Are you always kind of on the go to see what can be packaged? And when I say packaged, I'm talking about in a good, respectful way.
Joe, as you know, and your colleagues know, it's all about the local asset. We travel for difference, and it's how you use your asset, be it your language, be it your culture, be it your music, be it your bread. And if I take you back to Ljubljana, I'll guarantee that if I said to you, what was the highlight of Ljubljana, you'll tell me it was being served by disabled and mentally disadvantaged young people in the simplest restaurant with the simplest food going.
And singing.
And singing with them. It was magnificent. It was the experience, despite your friendship, despite those from Morris and Chris from the East Side being with us, that was the memory, a shared memory of a simple meal being delivered in a clever way, in an authentic way that had a story. And those aren't there for me to find, they're there for the community to highlight and say, this is the gold seam that we wish to mine for our tourism narratives. And we all need to now look deep and profoundly at the assets that we have. They're right in front of us, Joe.
There will be undoubtedly some people who will watch this program and they will perhaps initially think that tourism really isn't for them, and they haven't any plans to go on holiday, and tourism doesn't initially affect them. And one of the things that you've done very cleverly in some of your discussions, a couple of your discussions in Belfast, talked about the impact that tourism has on everyone. Employment, the condition of our streets, how we approach and talk to people who are clearly not from our own culture. So how do you convince people that tourism is not just about a holiday, but it is about an industry? It's about training, it's about education, it's about all of those things.
Well, I think it's to ask people to think of their own tourist activities or their own day trip. Even when somebody goes for a walk down the Falls Road and calls into a pub, and that's what their motivation is. I want to go for a meal in a pub, or I want to see the exhibition in the Connolly Centre. Think what happens on that. They probably get a bus. They've walked down a street where they're noticing whether the bins have been collected, whether shop frontages have been painted. They'll probably call in and buy a newspaper. So on that very simple 2-hour walk or 2-hour trip down the Falls Road, they've had interrelationships with all sorts of things that wasn't their prime motivation. And in spending their 5 or 6 quid in the Connolly Centre, they probably spent another 5 or 6 quid on incidentals that they had not planned to spend. Now, that's a really simple way of showing the equation in which tourism affects many different things. Now, you then extrapolate that, blow that up, and say, right, now let's look at that in terms of somebody visiting Belfast from, I don't know, Armagh. And all of that becomes much more integrated. much more connected, many more different areas of spending. And it's still about the movement of people between a community. And what we're going to find coming out of COVID is that these types of local markets, local activities are going to be the things that kickstart our businesses. So now more than ever before, domestic activity, domestic travel, greater connectivity, integration is what's going to be so important for us. And this is where, let's call it tourism or day trips, whatever. It's going to be so crucial to us getting back to some sort of normality. But it's going to begin with the local.
And that links me directly into your new book, Wish You Were Here. And the reviews of it, they talk in terms of it been a Bible for the industry and been a guide for the tourist. And it is remarkable. And 50 countries are covered, and you go from Copenhagen to everywhere, Ljubljana, right around the world. Is every country a different experience for you, or is there a set piece where this is a standard that no matter where you go, should be met?
Well, we travel for difference. So yes, every destination is different. In the book, every destination obviously has its own character features, anatomy, DNA, assets, and so on. But the reason why that 50 is in the book, and Belfast is in there, is because they all have a common way of dealing with tourists. They're all innovative. They all involve their communities. They all express kindness. They all express authenticity, and they all are well managed. And those are the points that, the book was written, Joe, before COVID. But I personally believe in my heart of hearts that the lessons from those 50 destinations will be the lessons that carry us through the next 10 years. And therefore, I'd like to think there's 2 editions of the book. There's one for the traveler, and I'd like to think it's really good armchair travel and allows them to dream and think about the places they want to go to. And the professional edition is a kind of art and science of what makes a good destination. They're only available as ebooks now. Print editions, God willing, will be available in September. But I'm delighted Belfast is in there. I love the fact that you like it, and thanks for the plug.
It's genuinely, it is the book to read. But be it, as you say, be it, if you like, the industry version of it, or be it the tourist industry. Or for those who are looking and not sure where they're going to go, just to look through those 50 locations and kind of get a sense of it. As I was looking at it, and as I was kind of reading it with Harry, I was just I have met you, I don't know, perhaps a dozen times, and I've been with you while you've been in Belfast. And as I keep name dropping, we spent some time in Ljubljana. I've never seen you standing still for more than 5 minutes. Did someone tie you to a chair and make you use the computer under the threat of not feeding you? How did you do it? When did you do it?
Well, the book was written between November and December of last year. I'm keeping active now. I've got a blog site, which I would love people to go to, whether you're in the industry or not.
Give us the details.
tourism-futures.com, and it will give you all sorts of other ideas about how we come out of COVID-19, places to go. There are people posting from around the world, really nice comments and ideas. So www.tourism-futures.com, go to it. You can order the books from there. But look, tourism will recover, communities will recover. We've got to work together, collaborate together, and really adopt an approach that, the destinations and their communities must now set the rules. It's not the international brands that set the rules. We have to set the rules.
You're internationally acclaimed. You're nationally acclaimed. You're recognized as, and I used the example earlier on, of an expert. And there are very few experts about it in my experience. But anyway, you're all of that. Does the industry have the capacity in the aftermath of this virus? Does it have the capacity to reinvent, rebuild? You know, you hear all of these stories about the price of travel, the price of flight will go up, 50%. Hotels trying to redeem the money will go up 100% in terms of cost and all of that. Does the industry have, number one, the expertise, two, the vision, and three, can it resist the temptation of putting everything sky high?
Well, nobody has that clarity in their crystal ball. What I will say is the following to sort of conclude, okay? First of all, when we do return, tourism is going to be at 2009 or 2010 levels to start with. So we're not re-entering the world as it was in 2019 from a tourism point of view. Secondly, every tourism button has to be reset. And we're going to come out of this with many things that are better for the tourism world. Over-tourism will not exist, therefore we can plan properly for degrowth, if you like. The industry is capable of innovation and capable of being creative enough to find the new ways through this. And in terms of pricing, I think where we will be going is we'll be looking at value rather than price-driven experiences. So if you can create for me what I believe as a consumer to be a wonderful experience that's worth this amount of money, I'll happily pay it. So I think we will be going to a experience-based, value-driven, low-volume model for the future. And tourism will recover, communities will recover, but it will be, thankfully, with a different agenda to what we had from the greed-driven agenda of late 2019.
We have about 3 minutes left of this fascinating interview, and I want to bring you back nearly to where we began. And some people might find it a wee bit strange that a boy from a small village, a beautiful village in Somerset, with a father and mother who weren't tourists and who lived within that square miles. I have to say, by the way, clearly I never met your father, but when you talked about him walking at lunchtime and walking back, when I was in Ljubljana, my legs grew 6 inches because you never stopped us walking. But anyway, that whole complete maybe cycle of a boy in a village, parents that never went on holidays, ends up writing books on tourism, touring the world, having an overview of where, from a tourist perspective, this world is going. Did you ever dream that that's where your life was going to take you?
When I was 15 years old, and remember this was before tourism really became a business. At the age of 15, I said to myself, I wanted to be the first professor of tourism in Britain. And I think I actually became the second. But when I put this down to one person, right? My geography master in grammar school was a man called Hugh Prudden. We nicknamed him Danny Prudden. And his geography lessons consisted of us traveling the world with him virtually and listening to the music of John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Oh. And in a grammar school in 1967-68, that was unheard of. And it was him I dedicate my entire career to. At the age of 15, he encouraged me to become the first professor of tourism in Britain.
On those words, and inspired by that music, because I also grew up with John Mayall and his Blues Breakers. So, Terry, can I thank you for being my guest? I will have you back on again. We'll have you on reading perhaps passages of the book, the highly recommended book. As I said when I began,
Diolch yn fawr iawn a diolch I pawb sydd yn y dinas orau yn Brydain, Belfast.
Thank you.